Welcome everybody to episode 15 of the Unchained Vodcast. That's right, we have done five episodes of this in addition to the other assorted shows and stuff that we've done. Today we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to some people's hearts. A lot of people have been very excited for this particular class, while some other people have been pretty lukewarm. I know in particular we have Brand here who is looking forward to playing the Scout. And the topic for today is there any purpose to the Scout class, to having the Scout? This isn't just coming out of nowhere. This was a discussion that came up recently, and by recently I mean a couple of weeks ago. We've been putting off the episode until we could get Brand on here for it. Because, well, Kriss and I, we're not playing a Scout, and that would be kind of...
No.
You know, but
yeah.
There's a certain core people that when they announced this class, they were very excited. It really sounded like something they really wanted to do. So I thought it would be interesting to start off the conversation with, what do you think it is about Scouts that people are so excited about?
Oh, easy.
At least for you.
Just for me. In any MMO I've played, PvP, open world PvP, you have the choice, a free choice to scout. You know, you have stealth classes, you can go around pretending to be a scout, but no MMO has really given mechanics intended specifically to do that, where they're not forcing you, but they're feeding the player's ability and want to be stealthy, to go in and do reconnaissance work without actually getting involved with the fighting. And that, I think, appeals to me most.
I'm not hugely excited about the Scouts. I know a lot of people are. It's a very divisive subject. For me, they might have a purpose, but it's gonna highly depend on how CSC treats them and what ability they really have and viability in the game they have. So it sounds cool, but it might be less cool than it sounds on paper.
Yeah, that's one thing I've kind of seen so far from a lot of the people that are interested in the Scouts, is that many of them, some of them do want to still be involved in PvP, but many of them don't want to be heavy into the PvP, or they're people that they seem to be either people that just really like the scouting role, which is in a lot of open PvP games in some way or another, which I think will be a good point that'll come up that you can probably bring up later again. But it is something that's in games in a lot of ways. So there's people that just want to do that. Then there's people that they like the idea of the game and they want to play it. But they're not really like heavy PvP people. They don't really dig getting into the PvP combat. Or I know a few people who have issues doing PvP, so they look at things like the Crafter or the Scout class as a way to still be involved in the game. Maybe they have friends that play, etc., without being overwhelmed by the PvP. Because PvP is, I don't want to say stressful, but it can be stressful for some people. It's not stressful for me, but I've talked to some people that have said that getting out there in the fields with all these people, getting shot by other players and everything, it really stresses them out. They kind of freeze up and they don't know what to do, and then they die, and then they don't want to do it anymore. And so I can kind of see the two groups, I guess, where some people are really looking for just that scouting experience, and some people that are looking to play the game but not have to constantly worry about PvP.
Yeah. Sure. It could be a time thing, too. The Scout is more of a sit down at your own leisure and do kind of what they do. You don't have to be on for 3 hours at a time or dedicate or commit to something in a larger group.
And Nanolag just brought up something, the troll factor. There are some people who really like the idea of being able to sneak into an enemy base and disrupt operations, mess with their building and stuff, push people off walls maybe, who knows. There's definitely a troll factor to the class that they've even mentioned before, that it is kind of a trolly class. There's some things you can do in there to mess with people, and I can see that appealing to some people. My question, I guess my next question would be, what... Well, actually, before I move to that, let's talk about gear progression briefly. Oldovic just brought that up in chat, wondering if gear will be useful for scouts. And that is an interesting thing, because since they're not engaged actively in PvP, how do they tie the crafted gear system in with the scouts in a way that's still compelling for them? Because, as Brand mentioned, for a lot of people, this is probably a class where, well, I can't play 24 hours a day, so I can log in for 2 hours, do my scouting, log back off. How do they still keep them in with the gear progression?
Well, depends on the role. I think, just like any other class, it's going to depend on the role they want to do. And the gear progression will be, for those involved in the PvP area, in the troll stuff, it's going to be a lot of stealth, probably, think. A lot of detection protections and things like that. And for the ones who are more explorers, we don't know what they're going to give them in terms of ability and of usefulness outside of the trollish or just the reconnaissance. But more, we talked about it when we talked about the class itself during the presentation. More of an explorer. The idea of maybe the landmarks being discovered by the scouts and updating the whole realms map for that. Those would be more a detection or fatigue maybe, or run speed bonuses and things like that.
Yeah. For me, I think it'll come into play with survivability. The scout is intended to go behind enemy lines. It's going to get caught. And with the death penalty still being a little unknown, but we believe a bit more intense than other MMOs, you just don't want to die, even though you're going to. You don't want to have to wait that time. The more you can scout, the better. So survivability for some of them, like the Vikings, or not the Vikings, the Spectre and the Wisp, anyway, want the survivability, where I think the Arisen wants more of the damage because he's intended to go and kind of die. So the stats still mean something, maybe to a lesser degree, but I want to transition that into the fact that the scouts seem to be one of the primary sources of the panic feature, which is a debuff, and so gear is still going to be essential in stats as far as those go.
Yeah, they'll definitely need survivability, especially for like the players that don't want to be too hampered by PvP. They don't want to worry about people killing them all the time. They're going to still want gear to help keep themselves alive in case someone does attack them.
Yeah.
And then for the trolling people, obviously they're going to be closer to combat. Some of the scout abilities are combative, even if they're not directly damaging per se.
Yeah.
So I guess to answer Oldovic's question, I do think there will be ways to tie them into the gear progression. They may not need it. They may not be as dependent on it, though, as other classes. They're definitely not necessarily going to need a sword, a really up-to-date sword for stabbing people, because they're probably not going to be spending much time stabbing people.
No.
For my next question, we're getting into the root of whether or not scouts are actually useful. A lot of people have, or some people have argued that most of the things that the scouts can do are going to require new systems and all this stuff, specifically for them. But these are things that, by and large, people can already kind of do on their own steam in other games by playing other classes that are either fast or stealthy or whatever. So, what can they do with scouts in Camelot Unchained that's better than what we've seen in other MMOs?
I just wrote this down actually right before the show, or something like this that would help. One key difference between other MMOs and this is the map size. It's a huge, huge, huge map, and going anywhere takes time. So in the main group, when they're traveling, they don't want to waste time by going to places where nothing's happening. They want to get right to everything, all the important fights, all the important locations, and having scouts by themselves are going around roaming, help pinpoint those locations, help the group get from point A to point B without wasting time, rather than a group scouting themselves, which they're more than capable of doing. They're wasting time trying to find places where they could be just led there by a scout because it's already been found.
But couldn't a solo player play another class and roam out to those locations and just type it in chat? Or for map alerts, have like PlanetSide 2 has, where people get like commander levels for leading groups, and then they can mark things on the map. Couldn't they just do something like that instead of having the scout reporting system and everything?
It's possible, but then that takes them out of what the intent of the game is anyway. For most of it is the PvP action. They're always talking about how they don't want players to be out of that action. They want them to constantly be engaged. And if another class who is meant to be involved in the fighting is doing that role, they're doing less of what they want them to do.
Yeah, but to play the devil's advocate on that, the scouting can be done also by the Veil Walkers.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely.
And the good thing for the Veil Walkers is that they can actually either defend themselves or ambush the other roamers and maybe eliminate some of the threat directly, that thing that the scout cannot do.
Yes. And tying back to what I was saying earlier, with debuffs, scouts are one of the main sources of panic. If you give that kind of function to another class that already has a whole set of functions, are you then overpowering one of those classes where they really do want a class that can act as a debuff class, but all the other classes have so much to them already, so where do you put that?
That is actually a good point, because that's one thing I was going to bring up is, should Veil Stalkers, should Stealthers not be able to scout? Because traditionally in a lot of games, the stealth classes are used as scouts.
Is the one,
so some people I could see would feel like that should be a Stealther function that they normally can do as an option. So my question was going to be, does making a scouting class kind of take that function from the Stealthers that they would normally have? But I do think it is a fair point that the scouts can do it by making the scouts a class. I guess they can do it a lot better and more efficiently, because they can give them really fast run speed and travel speed without it grossly affecting the game's combat and everything. They can give them better stealth techniques at long distances and everything, and a lot of abilities that if they stack those onto the Stealthers might be OP. I certainly don't want to see Stealthers blinking around like a wisp.
No. And yeah, I don't know. It will depend, as always, a lot on what they give, especially for the stealthing abilities to the scouts, because a scout that is not able to stealth efficiently is useless, because they don't have much of a, in terms of, as we say, of combat abilities. If they can't defend themselves and can't really hide themselves, they're gonna get screwed and they're gonna become useless.
And we're kind of already seeing something like that with the Wisp and her Illuminate effect, or byproduct of using her teleport ability. She's more seen at night, especially, so we're seeing the mechanical or the environmental importance of hiding, at least with the scouts, and being good at that through things like that.
Yeah, Oldovik mentioned having scouts detect new material bubbles for crafters, which is something I have to bring up. Like, should they be able to? Because they've mentioned that crafters will be the only ones that can, say, detect certain high-level materials and everything. So should scouts even be able to find and thus support crafters in this fashion by finding materials?
Well, if as a crafter, that's my point there. As a crafter, I would say it's okay for the scouts to be able to say there are materials there. I would be okay with that, saying I don't know what it is. It can be anything. it can be crap, but there's something. There's something there. There's a vein or whatever, a bubble that just popped here, and that's about all they should be able to do, and the rest should be done by the crafters. But I'm okay with that. That gives them, especially for the scouts, as we said, that are not too much interested into the combat side of the scout abilities, something to do.
Yeah, and that's
especially
part
since
of
the bubbles are not permanent. Some of them are, but the bubbles are not permanent. And as they promised, they will spawn randomly. So they will always have a need for scouting in that case, because it's the same. I was about to bring that point actually, because the exploring part of the scout abilities, at some point when you've mapped the land, when you've mapped the landmarks, when you've mapped the big castles and everything, what the hell do you do? They're not gonna change every day. So once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, and that's part of just the map feature in general. If the scout has sole access to that, you're providing a class that's not too focused in combat at the present time. You're not engaged too much, where you have the time to sit down, open your map, make all the pinpoints, and to update the realm. And I think offering a class like that ability to help crafters would be a good thing as well. And it just separates the time for the PvPers to do their thing and another class to do that for the scouts or for the crafters.
Let's see. Oldovic mentioned being able to identify enemy groups, maybe their composition, and marking them on players' mini-maps and things. Which I mentioned before, in some games, that's not necessarily tied to a class, like PlanetSide 2, that's tied to the group leader, who can mark things on maps. They can mark people, directly, things like that, in some games. So that is kind of, I guess, an aside conversation just about marking in general. Should scouts be the ones able to directly mark things on maps, or should alliance leaders or people who have, through some sort of leadership of groups and everything, gained a certain level of realm renown to be able to mark things on the map and mark groups and stuff for players?
It's a good question. If, and my video is cutting out here, but if the scout is given by nature those abilities or things like that, they should obviously be the ones to do it. But at the same time, someone who's running large organizations that, or guilds in this case, just community kind of events, needs the ability, knowing firsthand. You and I, Vellic, have tried to lead large events in previous games, and being able to direct those things is important for anyone in game or out of game to lead and pinpoint things like that. So I'd like to see it in both, and renown, I think, is actually a good suggestion on how to go about doing that.
Yeah, that's an area of concern for me, because I do think group leaders need a certain ability to mark things and mark locations on maps to be able to guide their forces. I really like the marking system in PlanetSide 1 and 2. I think PlanetSide 1 had it as well, where your alliance leaders and everybody could really get enough renown and mark things on the map for whole groups of people to go towards different objectives and stuff. It was very useful for coordinating efforts. I would really like to see something like that in Camelot Unchained. I think it would transfer over very well. And to some extent, scouts are supposed to also be marking locations and stuff. So there's kind of, I guess, a gray area there that they have to navigate, where if they give too much to the group leaders, it feels like they're taking some of the role from scouts. If they give too much to the scouts, well, then the group leaders can't do things that they really need to do.
Yeah. On the other hand, we know there are intentions to give scouts other things that it wouldn't make sense to give to like group leaders, such as determining what type of buildings or resources are in buildings and castles that only a scout can get by going into those castles. However, they're going to do that.
That's true.
that they're giving at least a lot more specifically and exclusively to the scout, where you can still share some of those with a leader type player.
Speaking of going into buildings, sabotaging, trolling the enemy faction, sabotaging their buildings, their production, whatever they have, their resources. Would it be inappropriate for stealthers or maybe even anyone that's just got lucky and got in, but stealthers, since they can go invisible, to be able to go into keeps and do something like that with crafter-made items? So it's not a class ability. It's just something the crafters made, kind of like the traps.
I would be okay with that because they showed us already for different stealth class that stealth is not absolute. So you're still taking the risk of getting killed inside the castle, and having to run back from all the way from the res point, because nobody will be able to reach you to res you if we have res, which we still don't know. But and if maybe a team of 2 can res the other or anything, but it's still a risk. It's not a sure thing, even if you have the items to sabotage, say, a wall or anything, because they can be done from both sides actually. But I'm okay with crafting a few C4s and giving that to a scout and get him into the castle and just blow up some things.
Absolutely, and I think any class, if it is a craftable item, should have the ability to use that craftable item. But the scouts are the ones that determine what craftable item you need and what you need to sabotage. Basically, they know what it is that's there, where another class wouldn't know what's there, but it would still be able to use the item.
Because that's kind of my point. If it wouldn't be a bad idea for other classes to be able to use craftable items as sabotage, then doesn't that suggest that they could go that route, which would then take kind of a major feature from the scouts and kind of suggest that the scouts don't necessarily have to have that gameplay aspect.
It could, but if the scout class was still the only class capable of discovering what resources were there, what buildings were there, they at least can pinpoint what you would need to build to sabotage that. Whereas you would just have to bring one of everything at that point. If you didn't
know that only the crafters will be able to determine what type of materials are the component for a building. So it would need to be a team of a scout to determine what the buildings are, and a crafter to be there to determine, for example, the weak points or the different components, so what different devices you would need for it and things like that. Because if you give that ability to the scout, that means you take one PvP-oriented ability from the crafters, which has been requested by a lot of crafters that want to do PvP.
Now, Oldovic asked the question in chat, what happens when scouts meet other scouts? To which I think I have a good idea. All the scouts have some sort of a marking ability, and I think most of the scouts aren't going to want to really engage directly in combat. So if 2 scouts see each other, I expect they'd probably mark one another and then run away. And then if you have allies nearby, they're gonna or stealthers specifically, they're gonna be able to. They're probably gonna see that marked scout and maybe be able to chase them down, or maybe archers will be able to shoot them and kill them. I mean, I'm sure the scouts could fight and stab each other, but that seems to be kind of contrary to their intended purpose.
Bringing that up, though,
go ahead.
With the marking, scouts, as far as I've been able to find anywhere, are also one of the primary sources for marking, and that brings an entirely different set of usefulness to combat specifically, where they're marking sounds. The way they word it sounds like it actually is an anti-stealth feature. In some cases, where it lowers the camouflage or lowers the cover stat of a stealther, it makes it more difficult for them to hide.
That would be a huge usefulness also in combat. And to reply to Rhaegar's comment, I wasn't, and I think the others either, talking about bypassing walls rather than sneaking into a keep before an attack or during an attack.
Well, they
Not
have
just-
mentioned them being able to walk through walls, unless they're like special protected
Yeah.
walls or something.
Yeah, but what do you carry? What will you be able to carry in that kind of situations?
Yeah, that'll
That's
be
what
up to
you
the
need to
developers.
determine
so,
also.
yeah.
As far as a scout versus a scout, they can still fight. They still have basic attacks and
Yeah.
even special attacks, like the Spectre can take your blood away from you. The Wisp can teleport, and it's going to be probably near impossible to keep up with. Whereas the Arisen is, I think, supposed to be the strongest combative of the three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't see too much happening with Scout versus Scout, but I'm sure people will go
They're
at
gonna
it and
debuff each other. That's all
Yeah.
they're gonna do.
trying to take your blood. You're gonna blow up. You're just gonna teleport away.
Now, Rhaegar did bring up an interesting point. What if scouts could support siege fire? I mean, we've talked about them being able to target people for other players to attack, but what if they could help direct siege fire? Maybe target specific facilities inside of a keep or something. I don't know. Maybe better enable arcing fire. I don't know how that would work with the physics engine, but you know, I could maybe see something in there where they could go in and do something to supplement the.
I see one. Excuse me.
They could just tell them where it is, I guess, and then they can lob things over the wall.
Yeah. But when it comes to buildings, unless certain things you add to your buildings are pre-made, could you not make anything look like something else? And therefore, having a scout be able to detect what that something is at that point relevant.
That's true.
Because unless it was pre-made in game, you know, you drop it in cube, all of this armory. If there was an armory, all armories look the same if they're pre-made. Or if you can build your own armory, it's going to look player-made, and you're going to have a hard time telling where that is. And
that's true.
The scouts play a role there.
We don't really know much about building upgrades and building features and stuff like that yet. They've kind of hinted that they are a thing, but we don't really know about them. My suspicion, because I don't see another way it can be done very well, is that the only way to do those type of building upgrades, like, you know, like maybe like a turret or some kind of automated turret or a spawning house for NPCs or something, NPC guards or something, is either A, they're going to be a prop that's pre-built and maybe there's different styles and you can pick one and put it in amongst your keep, or it's going to have some sort of building requirements that you have to meet in order for it to qualify. Yeah, it has to be the same certain size, or in which case it can maybe still be disguised somewhat, but not completely. So then a scout can go in and look at it. I think either way, you'd probably want a scout to go in and tell somebody where the building was inside the keep if they were going to try to attack over the walls to destroy that specific building. Let's see. What else I've got here? Now, are there any other... For what I'm hearing so far is honestly seems to be suggesting that the reason scouts are needed and their purpose is not actually scouting per se. Not scouting like the world map, as you would normally think, like scouting, world map, because other classes can theoretically do that. They can go out there and go, hey, there's an army over here, and they type it in chat, and they say that. But more, while people are trying to get away from combat, the true purpose for why the class is maybe extra useful outside of the just map awareness is actually being able to go and sneak inside of keeps, point out individual buildings, maybe point out where the commander of the army of that faction is, or maybe where all their healers are, pointing out other stealthers around the combat area so that people can know where they're at and focus fire them, and applying debuffs that they don't necessarily want to give out to the other classes because they're afraid of making them too powerful.
It's almost like you could rename the scouts as recon more than scouts, really.
Yeah, I think either one will work.
In a way, it's more the kind of things in modern military terms, the kind of things they have the tools for.
Yeah.
Rather than just scouting the map, Well, if you give them the ability to mark on the map for the whole realm, that's still an ability that nobody else has. But it has a limited lifespan in terms of abilities, because when you've marked everything, yes, the place of powers will change locations regularly when they're taken or destroyed.
Buildings get destroyed and remade in different places.
But it doesn't change overnight. So
somebody can walk out there and then go, hey, it's over here now. That's not going to take them too long.
About it.
No. So, but as far as marking...
More diversity is a good thing. Otherwise, there's no point to the class after some point.
As far as marking and updating the map, I think that becomes much more useful if the map does not label anything. If cities don't have names, or there are no textual or any sort of key features on the map, someone could be
just
like, oh, north of that. Yeah, blank map that shows trees, mountains, that kind of thing, where like typing that description might even become more challenging than it is for a scout to mark it. And so then they become more relevant.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that people who played scouts wouldn't be going out and marking things on the map, as much as it seems like that role, which people usually talk about when they're talking about why we don't need scouts. They're usually saying, well, people can just go out and type in chat and say, there's an army over here. That was what we use. People use TeamSpeak, Ventrilo, whatever, and go, hey, guys, there's guys moving around for our left. You don't necessarily need a scout class for that. Right. That's certainly a thing they can do, and that they're useful and that they could be much better at than a normal class. But the areas where it sounds like they have features that they can do that would be useful that other classes normally would not necessarily have is actually like the combat-focused things that they can do, where they can sneak through walls, point out things inside of keeps, sabotage structures. They can point out, certain types of enemies for focus fire, things like that. They can point out stealthers so they can't creep up on you. Those are things that I could see not wanting other classes to have, because you certainly don't want stealthers who can walk through walls, at least not in most games.
Those are also very localized things in what's going on around you and your group, rather than what's on one of the other islands, which you have no idea what's going on there. So those other things play an important role as far as what's going on beyond what you're seeing, beyond what's within the next 2 minutes worth of running. So those play important roles too.
So my last real question about that is, because the question of this is,
are they useful?
Are they useful?
Yeah.
And I guess that could be paraphrased to, are they worth the effort? It's not so much is it a cool class, but are they really worth the effort? So, the developers are going to have to put in time to create a whole class, 3 classes actually. They're going to have stealth mechanics. They're going to have special abilities and animations for all these classes. They're going to have some sort of targeting systems tied into their map, a whole system for that. They're going to create a sabotage system of some sort for this class. So, do you think the benefits of having this? How would you say that the class is justified for the development time?
I think it's justified because I look at this almost in a reverse order, in that I don't think they designed the scout and then decided, let's make all these systems for them. I think they designed some systems and were like, how do we implement that? And we can't give it to these other classes, so let's make a scout. And in that case, everything's justified for the most part.
That is a good point. I had not considered that, actually.
Because it is, from everything we've seen from CSE, that seems to be the way they do things. They think about the abilities and the end result, and then adapt the rest to that result. So if they actually have already all the systems and just need to separate them between classes, then I don't have a problem with having scouts. If it takes time away from other things that might be more important, let's say it. Scouts are a very localized utility. So if it takes away time from things that are a lot more beneficial to the whole of the game. I'm not gonna say crafting because everybody knows I'm thinking about that. But then no. But yeah, that's also why at first they were saying it might not be at launch, but it might be an X pack. If they decide they finally can do everything at launch, I'm fine with that.
That's the current goal.
Yeah,
that is
that's
the
30 classes by launch.
Yep. So if they can manage that and not cut back on anything, I'm all okay with that. If they have to cut back, I would say Scout is one of the classes I wouldn't be too mad about if they delayed it.
Whisper of a dream. They get 30 classes in by launch. I admit I hadn't considered the idea that they had already created all these concepts. That we want a system where people can mark locations on the map for other players and everything, and that we want a way to sabotage buildings and stuff like that. And then they turned and went, how do we add this? Well, we can't give it to them. We can't give it to them. We can't give it to them. Why don't we just make a class that does these things that we want? And we put it in the game. I hadn't considered that as an option, and I do think that would completely negate most of the arguments against the Scout, if that was the case. And
in a way, I think it's actually the case because
it might be.
When they started the class reveals, and they started with the path system and completely redid all the path system to divide them into other classes. I think they started the systems for the path and just broke them down, as Odulvik said. They just broke them down between different classes to make things a bit different and fit the new class system rather than the past system.
It makes more sense from a game development design point of view, to start with the features that they want and divide them up amongst the different classes rather than just creating classes and then dishing them out, making up features for them. What I was going to say for why I think they're worth it, because though I've been asking a lot of negative questions, I just decided to play devil's advocate for this. I love the Scout class. I think it's a great idea. I've even said in other casts that I would be very displeased if they were not in by launch, because I want the map features. But what I was going to say as an argument for having them is additional subscribers. I think the class will pay for itself in additional subscribers to the game, which pays all their salaries and helps to maybe help them hire on new people or maintain the staff that they do have post-launch. Because I think we've already seen, certainly not all the people that want to play Scouts aren't big PvPers.
Yeah.
But some of the people that have come on board and said the Scout sounds awesome are people that probably wouldn't have played the game otherwise, or would have had to play a crafter. But I've seen some people as well that were like, I don't really dig PvP so much, like all the time. I want to play a Scout, and I don't like crafting. So for them, the Scout is really the only option. And I don't think that's like a huge number. I don't think they're going to have, massive quantities of subscribers that wouldn't have played another class. But I do think it might be justified in the amount of subscribers that they get if they have that for the continuation of the game and its financing.
It's one reason. It's a good reason.
Money!
Yeah.
Money. Money's always a good reason. Yeah. Well, that was all my questions, unless somebody else has some other amazing revelation about Scouts that they want to bring up.
I did my job. Made you guys question yourselves at the end of this.
That was a good vision indeed for the way they would see the Scouts, and yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely
it made sense.
A good way to phrase it. I think people can then take to anybody that's questioning why Scouts are necessary and say, well, if this is the case, there's no reason not to have Scouts, really, because they wanted to build all this stuff anyway. All they've got to do is build the class abilities, and That's not necessarily a huge ton of work when they're building, how many other classes already. So, with that said, I want to thank everyone for coming out again, and thank Brand, of course, for making it out here. For episode 15, we will be back in 2 weeks.
I'm sad that Sacrex wasn't there because he was one of the most.
He was the one
scouts.
really vehemently against the scouts, and he didn't make it. But that's what happens sometimes. But maybe he'll be here in 2 weeks at Saturday at 6:30 p.m. EST when we do episode 16 on some sort of topic. Hopefully they'll have some news by then. I'm really hoping for Beta 1 news. We will see.
I'll be here. We'll see.
Yes,
we will see. So thank you all, and we will catch you later.